Hi everyone, it's Nick. Welcome back to my channel. Okay, in today's video, we are going to be talking about 3 major interior design styles for 2023 and how they are shaping interior design trends for 2023. So we talk a lot about trends, right? We talk about things like checkerboard patterns, statement marble, curves, the blobs, right? We've talked about just all these different thrifting and vintage, like all these trends that are happening. But I thought it was really good for this video to zoom out a little bit and look at sort of the different interior design styles that are shaping some of those micro trends that are showing up in stores. So I'm going to be talking about a little bit about the history of these styles and what they're in a response to. So we're going to get a little bit into some history around what was popular before, because that's how design works, and sort of how things have sort of trended over the last several years, and my prediction of where they are going in the future. So let's get going. Let's talk about it. Okay, the first interior design style that I think is really shaping the trends for 2023, and I think beyond, is going to be postmodern, sometimes called the 90s aesthetic, sometimes called Gen Z aesthetic. So really, there's a lot of different styles that can sort of fit into this, and that's true for these sort of 3 major styles I'm going to be talking about throughout the video. This style, though, to me, is sort of a new interpretation of the 90s style that we saw before, which is really more of a postmodern style, which, you know, many will credit comes to sort of the Memphis group, which was sort of a very weird, interesting, zany sort of group that did some amazingly cool, funky furniture pieces back in the day. And a lot of those are coming back, or even if they're not directly from the Memphis group, they're definitely inspired by that Memphis group. Because again, this is that 90s throwback aesthetic that we see all the time. And Gen Z loves this. This is a style that seems to be very, very popular. I mean, the Memphis group really was such an interesting, had such interesting designs. It was once called a shotgun wedding between Bauhaus and Fisher-Price, which I think is a hilarious way to describe that style, because it does have a Fisher-Price quality to it, you know? And this style was really a response to modern design that came before it. So if you look at kind of mid-century modern, that of course was really popular in sort of 50s, really 60s and into the 70s, this postmodern style was a response to that. So we're getting a little bit of a history lesson here, but modern design is the purification or the simplification of design into its most basic shapes, right? So that really is that very simple, sort of pared down, basic furniture pieces that we see in Scandinavian design and mid-century. Although those 2 styles all inspire each other, they're actually a little bit different in terms of, well, for a bunch of different reasons, but we won't get to that into this video. So instead of saying, let's take design and make it really simple and basic, let's not do that, and let's make design super creative and weird and interesting. And maybe it's not always super functional, but it's cool and it's interesting, and let's break the rules. And that was really what postmodern design was all about. And we saw that in the 80s, we saw that in the 90s, and we're seeing that done now. I would say you can see this new contemporary postmodern in, you know, designer work from the likes of Kelly Wearstler, right? I mean, her work is really leaning in to some of those really zany, cool, interesting sort of design pieces that we saw from back in the day. And you can also see it come through in, you know, a lot of the TikTok DIYs that you see a lot of the 21-year-olds doing in Gen Z, right? Like, I'm sure Kelly Wearstler loves that I compare like a DIY foam mirror from TikTok to some of her amazing work. But, you know, if you, from a style perspective, it's not a ton different. Really what we're often dealing with is a difference of budget. That's really what we're talking about. It's not actually stylistically a whole lot different. They're both inspired by similar styles, and it's really shaping high-end design, but it's also shaping a lot of the more budget DIY friendly stuff as well. So as you see the buying power increase for this younger generation, I think you'll see this stuff move beyond sort of the teenager DIYs and more into some mainstream retailers. You see a lot of this in those micro trends I talked about earlier. You're seeing the checkerboard pattern, you're seeing the blobs, you're seeing the disco balls, right? All that stuff is really that throwback to that postmodern era. So irony and playfulness is really important in this design style as well, and I think you're seeing this show up in a lot of different ways. Kelly Wearstler, for example, uses the bum chair in a lot of her design, so obviously that's going to be a higher end design, but you also see this in a lot of the Urban Outfitters decor pieces that are really popular right now, especially again with those Gen Zs. I think this sort of playfulness and fun in sort of your decor accents is really central to the style, and I think you're going to see a lot more of that. So that's really why you're seeing all this stuff show up in stores, and I think that's why you're going to continue to do so. And I think the reason this design style is very popular is because design works in cycles, and it's oftentimes just a pendulum swinging back and forth between different styles, because there's only so many ways you could build a chair, right? So we saw that come through in the 80s and 90s as a response to modern design, like I mentioned, but we're seeing that now. I believe that this design style is so popular right now with this younger demographic, and even in the high-end design, because people are kind of bored of modern design, because we saw it so popular in the mid-2010s and into the 2021s even. You know, shop at West Elm, shop at Article. It's a lot of that stuff over and over again, and I think a lot of people found themselves really bored with it. And so just like in the 80s and 90s, I think people are looking for something really new and interesting. They're looking for something that breaks that mold and really kind of busts free of the sort of mid-century modern design style, which has been so popular for many, many years. I think this generation, like every generation, trying to make their stamp on creating their kind of own design style, I think is turning to postmodern because the millennials that came before them, people like me, loved modern design so much. We just saw so many spaces that started to look the exact same, that were mid-century modern, that were Scandinavian. That was really the design style that the millennials loved. And so I think this new generation is just looking for more interesting creative pieces, just like the postmodernists wanted to do back in the 80s and the 90s. So that is really why we are seeing so many of these trends show up in store. It's high end, it's low end, it's all over the place, and it will continue to do so because postmodern and that 90s aesthetic is something that is just going to shape the next decade of interior design, in my opinion. Sometimes I don't love all of it, as you guys know, but you know, that's fine. People seem to love it, and I get why they love it, because they're looking for something different than the Scandi in the mid-century that we saw before. Okay, next interior design style that I think is shaping all sorts of trends all over the place is a new take on traditional. So we'll call that new traditional, I suppose. So when I actually started on YouTube back in 2020, there was a lot of talk about Grand Millennial and how traditional was coming back, and it was coming back in like really big, bold ways. So it was that granny chic, right? It was pattern on pattern, it was maximalist, it was big, it was bold, and this was supposedly the new version of what traditional was. And of course, as you may have known if you've been around here for a couple of years, I've been very skeptical that that was the direction it was headed. And I think I'm gonna say I was largely proven right. I mean, look, I'm wrong all the time, but I would say, so I'm not trying to like say I'm always right, but that never really felt like a style that was going to really make sense for a lot of people. And I still sort of stand by that. But I will say that traditional is now definitely coming back in a much more sophisticated way. And you can even see this too in other design styles like cottagecore that are a little bit related to this new version of traditional. We're seeing a lot more interesting countertop profiles in the kitchens. We're seeing shaker cabinets and lots of different detailed, ornate woodworking being brought back into cabinetry. You're seeing big, grand fireplaces made of, you know, gorgeous stone, and it's traditional, but it just feels very updated, and it still has sort of higher end materials, and it doesn't feel as fussy as traditional felt in the past. So some of those sort of ornate, intricate pieces of woodworking, of stonework, whatever, that is being paired with sort of a little bit more simple or modern pieces at the same time. I am seeing this happening all over the place. I'm seeing a lot of beautiful designs coming out that I would put in the category of traditional, but they definitely feel really current and really special. And I think it also feels really homey to people. It feels really comfortable, and it feels like a type of style that is accessible. It feels like a style that people don't feel like it's super minimal. It doesn't feel really cold, but it feels really homey. And I think people love that because if you're, you know, a regular person who wants to, so not, you know, creating some funky, weird spot, but if you're like just a person who's wants to just kind of raise a family and have children and wants a comfortable home that they live in and not necessarily live in like an art gallery or something, this style feels really homey and friendly and comfortable for people to be able to make it their own, and it just feels really cozy and familiar to people. So it's rooted in tradition, but it's paired with different materials and in a style that still feels pretty contemporary. So why is this one so popular, and how is this impacting trends down the line? Well, it's really popular because, again, the mid-century and the Scandinavian that came before it that was so popular before, I think people realized that, you know, clean lines and simple basic shapes can be fun and all, but sometimes they're a little bit boring. So instead of the postmodern direction, I think a lot of people are looking to traditional and saying, you know what, I can create a really beautiful, sophisticated space, but I don't necessarily have to have everything flat and square. I can still have some more intricate detailed work being done, right? I can still, you know, a water waterfall countertop, you know I love one of those. Those can be great, but there's lots of countertop profiles that are out there that are a little bit more traditional that are also gorgeous and can make for really beautiful, amazing kitchens. And so if you look at some of these images of some of the traditional designs that I'm seeing coming out right now, you can see a lot of the trends that, you know, I talk about on this channel and you see trending all the time. You can see them popping up over and over, right? That love of vintage, the love of things that are really familiar. And also a lot of those styles that we saw in the past, like Scandinavian, a lot of those minimalist styles, they didn't usually incorporate in a lot of color. And so I think the use of traditional is bringing in a lot more pattern and color than we have seen in recent years. So a lot of people have been craving color, and so they are looking to, you know, sage green or blues or reds or things like that that are really gorgeous and beautiful, and they're looking to dial up the saturation a little bit, not going for things in the black, white, beige, cream category, but instead moving towards actual real color. And you can really bring that through in a traditional style, you know, even this new sort of traditional. Also, we hear a lot of trends about open concept going away and going back to the traditional floor plan. This is that style that we're talking about. This is that overarching interior design style so popular right now. We're seeing all over the place. This is one of those areas where, you know, a traditional closed concept home makes a ton of sense for using this type of style. So I think the really open, basic, minimalist style that was super popular with open concept for years, you know, as this style is changing, people are, you know, maybe not putting up a ton of walls, but definitely closing off those spaces to be a little bit more of a traditional floor plan. Okay, and then third, super hot interior design style that I think is shaping so many trends is going to be organic modern. So the organic modern, I mean, I think I mentioned in a video before, someone said organic modern is dead, and I was like, I don't feel like it is, because this to me is where modern design has moved in this direction. And again, I'm not saying modern in the sense of current, because I think that that's really more contemporary design. Modern, I mean modern in the classic sense. So we're seeing a lot of really clean lines, really basic shapes, but instead of the Scandi mid-century modern that we have seen in the past, this is a new interpretation of modern. So modern is not dead. So a lot of people, you know, it's all about postmodern and traditional. Yeah, sure, for those two other styles, but modern is not really actually going away. I think this is the new interpretation of modern. You know, in modern design, you still see things like fiberglass and plastic, and you see acrylic like chairs, things like that. You see really bright, bold colors. You can see olive green and orange, right? All that was really popular in MCM. Not really seeing that here with the organic modern. So this is sort of a new interpretation of modern design, which is very popular and shaping so many trends that you're seeing in store. This is going to involve a much more neutral color palette. It's going to lean into greens, tans, brown, maybe some blue, maybe some rust, right? Earth tones, basically colors that you see are quite prevalent in nature. Yes, there's lots of color in nature, I get that, but these are like really natural, sort of pared down, and it really creates a space that feels very serene and very relaxing because you've got a lot of those neutrals. And again, we're dealing with very toned down color choices here in that palette, but the materials is also what really separates it. Instead of seeing fiberglass and plastics and mirrored finishes and things that you would see in mid-century modern, with organic modern, you're seeing much more natural materials being used. So a lot of stone, a lot of wood, a lot of jute. I hate to say jute because people make fun of me for saying jute too much. Play a drinking game. Every time I say jute, take a drink. So you got jute, right? Cotton, linen, like all those natural materials, seeing a lot more of that in organic modern. Also the shapes of things, a lot more room to play with organic shapes as opposed to everything being really straight, plain, and basic. And again, Scandi mid-century, that's what we were using. With organic modern, there's more room for playing with more squiggles, a little bit more curves, a little bit more organic, where, you know, things just kind of are a little bit more rough, a little bit more rustic, and the shapes can come more inspired from nature, which doesn't work in clean and straight lines. And instead, you know, you're just embracing a live edge table, for example, right? You're playing with kind of rustic beams on the ceiling, or even coffee table that might be in like a really rustic worn wood, things like that, that make sense in organic modern that wouldn't have made sense in the mid-century and the Scandi and even the boho and stuff that we saw was so prevalent in sort of those late 2010s. So this style to me is the new interpretation of modern. I think it's really gorgeous. This is a style that I really, really love. And you're seeing a lot more of it. And you can see like even other interior design styles, which are similar, like Japandi, you know, like warm minimalism, similar sort of styles, they all sort of fit in this category of more like organic modern. And these are sort of the third category that I think is really driving a lot of those things that you see in stores. So if you're seeing a lot of earth tones, you're seeing a lot of sort of rough and rustic woods, I would say this is what makes sense. Also, a lot of, dare I even say, this somewhat, to me, feels sometimes so rustic rustic that it almost can feel a little farmhousey. I know I'm not talking about the cheesy word signs because I know designers talking about farmhouse. It's a complicated relationship, but I think that this style feels a little bit accessible for that reason, because there is sort of a rustic, homey, sort of organic feel to it, which sometimes feels a little bit less like a 1950s film set, like you would have maybe seen in mid-century modern, in the past. So this feels a little bit more wabi-sabi, a little bit more rustic, a little bit more lived in, and I think that's also why people love it. So I love too looking at all like the little small trends that are happening in design, but I think when you zoom out and you start to really look at what's really driving all of these micro trends, why am I seeing that chair everywhere, or why am I seeing that lighting fixture? If you zoom out, you actually realize it's because there's really some major things that are happening in design, and that's sort of filtering through into some of those smaller trends. So you can see things, right, like the wavy squiggly mirrors that we see all over the place, right? Well, that's clearly a postmodern inspiration. Or if you see like a checkerboard floor tile, that also kind of feels a bit postmodern in some ways, and I think it gets worked into that, but it also feels super traditional at the same time. So statement marble, right, works beautifully in a traditional space, also works beautifully in an organic modern space. So when we talk about statement marble being really popular, it's because it sort of fits in some of these different categories. These are the broad 3 interior design styles. There's lots of different little ones that are kind of loosely related to these ones, but these are the big 3 that I think are really driving trends right now in interior design. And let me know what you think. Which one's your favorite, by the way? Comment, let me know which one you actually love. I'd love to hear from you guys. I love organic modern myself, but you know what? I kind of find myself also really loving some of these beautiful traditional spaces. They look really comfortable and very homey, so these are really cool. And I'm glad we didn't go with kind of like the grand millennial thing. I think that was a red herring that we didn't fall for. This new version of traditional, I think, is a lot more timeless than some of the things that we saw before. So that's it for me for today, you guys. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I'm gonna throw here to my top interior design trends that I am really loving for 2023. So some of these things might even appear in there. And now you understand a little more of the context about where those trends are coming from. So I'll see you all in that video. Thanks, bye.